has any changes or questions to the minutes? Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Turn your mic on. All right, say it one more time.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Thank you. With that, we will go to, we do have a quorum right now. And at this point, is the city attorney joining us?
Yes, she's online. She's with us via Zoom.
Okay.
Hi, yes, this is Sherry. I'm online. I'm very ill, so I have to stay
Oh,
home.
sorry, Sherry. Could you
Thank you.
swear in everybody who's speaking?
Yes, if you're going to speak to the board today, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear and stand? If you can, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay, thank you. And now our first item on the agenda is case number UDP HP 23020 930 Tequesta Street. I think.
Well, the representatives here.
Oh, okay.
Good evening. It's
Good
Stephanie
evening.
Mayorga with Stephanie Toothacre's office on behalf of the applicant. We were advised today that there was no quorum, so we were not prepared to present. So we are requesting a deferral to the November 6th hearing.
Okay, one of our members is recusing himself.
Understood.
Okay. And you're requesting to what meeting?
November 6th.
November 6th in 2 months?
It's
Trish?
in 1 month.
1 month, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And we also, for the record, we are requesting concurrently an extension of the statutory review timeframe to December 6th. So that would cover both the hearing, the next hearing, and the 30-day city commission call-up period.
Okay. We have to vote on this, right?
No.
No. Okay.
No, you don't have to vote on that.
We will see you then next
Okay.
month.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask, Mr. Chair, who's recusing to me?
Mr. Bray.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, the next item is UDP HP 23020 930 Tequesta Street. We just did this. Wait a minute, sorry. 23032,
Actually,
yes.
can we back up for a minute?
What? Pardon?
With that, I'm wondering if you can clarify what was stated before on a previous meeting about the 180-day period.
Why don't you tell us, what page are you referring to?
Well, it's page 8, where
we spoke about it pretty in depth the last meeting.
Yep.
Basically, after 180 days, and Sherry can correct me here, I think it's a matter of, I don't want to say it's a matter of law, but it's some procedural element that allows for the applicant to move forward with their request without our ability to, let's say, work through the application. I think it's their right because we never give them an opportunity to be heard.
right, but I'm trying to figure out like what section of the ordinance that they're referring to and to clarify it, because in certain sections it refers to it's automatically approved after 180 days, and in the demolition section it doesn't note, it doesn't say specifically.
So this comes from a statute, Florida Statute 166.033, and it states that after staff has determined that the application is complete, then the city has, for the quasi-judicial hearings, it has 180 days from that date to approve or deny or approve with conditions the application. So what appears to be happening is, due to the fact that we haven't had quorum, that deadline is going to come sooner than rather than later. And so what they were just doing is saying that the city has till December, I forgot what date in December, but until December to make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny. The statute itself doesn't state that it's automatically approved. I only know of the case that was litigated all the way to the 4th DCA with our city that indicated that the Planning and Zoning Board's approval governed, because that was within the 180 days, and the City Commission's denial They could no longer deny it. It was already approved within the 180 days. There's not much case law out there on this because it's a fairly new requirement, but that is the case law that I know of. So there is nothing in the statute that says it's automatically approved. The Planning and Zoning Board issue is different because they actually voted and approved the item. So I'm not sure what will happen if we don't meet that deadline with this particular applicant, what they will choose to do, but there is nothing in the statute that says it's automatically approved.
So it just needs further clarification.
Okay, all right, thank you. With that, we will move to our second item, which is UDP HP 23032, 816 Southwest 4th Place. Do we have someone here? Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Can we do the disclosures? And I didn't hear, I'm sorry, are you speaking in the mic?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, first of all, do we have any disclosures from the board? Ashley?
None here.
Been by the property many times.
Driven by the property?
None.
Okay, thank you. Applicant.
Chair, would you like the staff report first?
Yes, I would, thank you.
Well, I'll be brief. The applications requesting a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations and new construction for the installation of new windows and doors, replacement of the asphalt shingle roof with standing seam, metal roof, raising the roof, raising the deck, solar panels, additions on the east and west side of the property. The staff finds that the application for COA for this project for the major alterations and new construction under case number UDP HP 23032 located at 816 Southwest 4th Place meets the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CI of the ULDR, meets the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CII of the ULDR and partially meets the criteria as outlined under section 4717 of ULDR for the following reasons. The Hardy Board is not listed within the material and design guidelines. On the south elevation facing New River, which we consider front facing or a frontage, the horizontal sliding windows are proposed. Per the sailboat bend material and design guideline, horizontal sliders are only permitted on the sides and rear, but as this is considered frontage, we consider this a right-of-way, and it's evaluated the same way as it would be on the front. To be consistent with the properties throughout Sailboat Bend Historic District and the material and design guidelines, fixed windows, single-hung windows, or casement windows would be more preferable. If the board makes a motion for approval with conditions, or a motion for denial, we would ask that the board adopt a motion with the following conditions. All glass must be clear with an option of low E, and applied muntins must have a raised profile. This property is located in an archaeological significant zone, and a cultural resource assessment survey is required per the conditions outlined in the letter in your packets from the city archaeological consultant, Coastal Archaeological and History Research, Inc. And then number 3, the application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Applicant?
Hi. So, yes, as she stated, we are just doing an addition to the sides, replacing all the windows and doors, raising the roof so the actual walls will need to be higher, and a new roof in order to have the 26 degrees required in South Florida for the solar panels. Right, which is why we're changing the roof.
You needed a certain angle for the solar
Right.
panels.
And the client also, because they're doing this renovation, would like to have a little bit of vaulted ceilings in their interior of the home. The sliders that were mentioned, was under the impression it was only the sliding glass doors. I didn't realize that it was it was windows as well. Those are easily exchangeable to the single hung or casement, or like, can they be a crank that opens?
What are they now?
I believe they're single hung up and down. Right now, I think there's only, it's fixed, and then the French doors.
Because you could do casement with the Muntins
Right.
and give the same look.
Right.
If that would
So we
work
can,
for you.
I can, yeah, definitely. I can look into that, and change it to that. And then the hardy board, we were just looking for something that was a little bit more durable. I can work with you guys to find a material that's maybe not wood, that will rot. I don't know what your opinion on that is.
About the hardy board?
Yes.
Tricia?
Yeah, in certain circumstances, we've allowed hardy board in the past for non-contributing properties or new construction, but not necessarily as a replacement material for the original wood siding. But it's not listed within the material and design guidelines for the Sailboat Bend Historic District, so it's something that staff has to call out to the board. So it's under consideration by the board in this
Oh, it is.
circumstance.
Have we approved it before?
For new construction and on non-contributing properties, but
Okay, you did
not
say
for
that. You
contributing
did say that.
properties and not for the replacement of existing wood siding.
Okay.
But in this circumstance, what they're asking for the hardy board is for on the exterior of the addition.
Right.
Right.
So it would be different on the exterior of the addition than the material on the exterior of the original? Or it would be all one material?
I guess we were thinking about replacing the whole thing just for durability. But if it does not get approved, then we would go back to just matching the wood siding, if that's the ultimate decision.
I have to ask a question here. What about the fake wood that is not real wood?
That's a composite material. Generally,
composite.
hardy board is
It's the same.
is the same type of material that would be selected in this circumstance.
Okay. I have gone on the record in the past that I have a real concern with this from an architectural standpoint because I don't think real wood is going to hold up well in the Florida environment. And I think we need to change the code, as I've said before, to include composite wood. So just my statement, but please.
And then basically that's all that is being done. It was the windows, the two additions, the roof, raising the exterior walls. And then on the interior, we're keeping half of the house pretty much the same. And then the back of the house is getting major renovation. It's getting a new kitchen, we're reconfiguring the back bedrooms to create an additional bathroom for the back bedroom, because right now there's only one bathroom.
Right.
And
there's only one floor.
there's only one floor.
Okay.
One floor.
No storage upstairs? I was surprised that wasn't here.
Maybe in the bedrooms, the bedroom area.
Okay.
I believe I can probably convince her to do some ceiling there, but she was.
It's
they're
not
very,
my house.
Yeah,
I was
know.
just asking. Yes.
They're very adamant that they want the look of the vaulted ceilings on the inside.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's basically all we're doing. The new bathrooms would go in the addition on the west side, and the east side we're just extending it to make the bedroom and kitchen a little bit larger than it is right now.
And as you said, you're going to use the same material all around the house.
All around the house,
Okay.
yes. We would
I would just hate to see you split between two
No,
different
no, no,
materials
we-
because they're weathered differently.
No, I wouldn't want to do that. It would be the same material, whether it's
Right.
the composite or wood.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Do we have anybody else from the public who would like to speak on this project? If not, I'll open it up to board members.
Arthur, I have a question just for you. I don't recall a renovation with the solar panels, so how does that work for us? Do we do that across the board?
I'm going to let Tricia answer that.
Yeah, there is a state statute that basically says that we have to approve solar panels, and we can't decrease their efficiency, but we can work with an applicant to try to find an ideal location. But at the end of the day, if it decreases the efficiency in relocation of those solar panels, we wouldn't be able to do that. So in this scenario, I think they have the panels facing south, which would be the optimized location, and they have enough panels in place to get the optimal use out of the solar panels. So reducing that would not allow them to do that unless that was by choice of the applicant.
I have one question about your drawings. Everything is clear except there's no north arrow. Which is north?
Oh, no. That's because I changed the title block at the very end.
Oh, I know that happens.
North is if you're looking at the sheet, north is the bottom of the sheet.
North is the bottom, okay.
Yeah. The north side
Oh,
is the
yeah.
bottom.
You do have it marked on the floor plan.
Okay.
Now I see it. Thank you. Any other board member questions?
I have a comment. I do know for a fact that there are other properties that are contributing properties in Sailboat Bend who do have a hardy board applied to their houses. So because it's just a recommendation or a guideline, I don't see it as a barrier for us approving it with the hardy board for this property. Otherwise, like again with the front and rear, I have a problem because per pure definition, a front, you only have one front, you have one back, and you have sides. So I know that Miami, as you're going to say, looks at it differently, but for pure definition purposes, it doesn't make logical front that you have multiple fronts because properties that have multiple sides, a view from the public, therefore have no rear and they have no side. You have total fronts. So you have to decide, in my opinion, what is the front of the house.
And I still repeat that certain cities in South Florida maintain that since a lot of these houses were built on the water was actually the first way that people entered before the roads were done. Maybe not in this location, so it could be either way, but it is dependent upon how. Does the city define, Tricia, which must be the front?
It's just
It's the
right
river.
of way.
So, but why are we saying the river is
The river is considered a right of way.
Okay, thank you.
But as I'm pointing out, many
Yes.
properties have multiple right-of-ways.
Right.
And so you haven't got a clear front on any property. So as you're pointing out, that may have been a historical perspective of people approached the properties by water 100 years ago, but that's not today, and that's not how we approach homes. It's how you get your mail. It's how all of these things are approached and delivered in today's society.
Okay. Ashley, do you have anything to say?
I do not right now.
Okay.
I would just add to Richard's comment where I totally agree with his point on both the hardy board and you made the hardy board comment initially, Arthur, but on the front, and even more so noting that when you have a corner with two right-of-ways, the zoning office allows for you to elect which is going to be perceived to be the front. So I don't know why we would then just make that reach to say the back, because a horizontal slider makes a lot of sense on the back of a house. And pretty much every other neighborhood is going to, I would think in most cases, use a horizontal slider. So to not have it work here is just, it's almost unfair. It doesn't seem to me a logical alternative. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on this, but I'm leaned on allowing for it.
With that, would someone like to make a motion?
Well, I do have one other question or comments regarding these archaeological requirements on here. I'm trying to understand where the statutes or requirements are for the city of Fort Lauderdale. I do not see it as a requirement other than a notation that at archaeological sites, and archaeological sites, it only has one, That's the Rivermont Midden, which is an archaeological site. Otherwise, they're just zones.
Before you go on, I just wanted to confirm with Tricia. It says that we're having somebody from the archaeological network today. Is that still true?
Yes.
Why don't we hold this until we have that representative?
Right, but the application is requiring that. So
Right.
to ignore that requirement or discussion on it,
But right now, as I
Well, we
understood
have
it,
in several different locations requirements for review of archaeology. So we have it in the ULDR in a couple different locations. We have it in the comprehensive plan that specifically says we require studies for properties that are in archaeologically significant zones, and we also have it in our certified local government agreement.
okay.
Okay. So with that, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve. I'll make a motion to approve the resolution for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under case number UDP HP 23032, located at 816 Southwest 4th Place, based on the finding of facts in the staff report, without making the criteria or the conditions cited in number 1 and number 2 apply, allowing for the hardy board, allowing for the south-facing horizontal sliding windows, but subject to the conditions that all glass must be clear with an option of low E, and the property being located in the archaeological significant zone and cultural resource assessment survey, requiring for the conditions outlined in the attached letter in the agenda from the city's archaeological consultant be reviewed and applied, and that the application be subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all other ULDR requirements.
I just have one addition, if you'll so accept
Sure.
it. When you talk about the horizontal sliding windows, it should also add with the appropriate muntins. They're showing that in the drawings.
If we have if they're showing it, then I would think they have the intention to add it. Whether do we have the ability to make it a condition?
Yes, because it's historical. More so than a clear
Well, it's already
sliding.
showing, though.
Pardon?
Showing it sliding with the muntins, so it's already in the application.
Right.
as
Okay.
presented.
So, yeah, because it's showing it, Arthur, I would
Okay.
just leave it as
All
I
right.
stated it.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Good luck. That's all we have on the agenda today. We did have a communication to the city commission.
Yes, there was a communication, and Richard Rosa did attend last week.
I went to the meeting.
Hey.
Yeah, it was a very brief attendance.
Lucky you.
But they heard us loud and clear, and the mayor was quite receptive and put a roll call in place to the commissioners that were not having appointed members of the board. I cannot recall the members off the top of my head, or the commissioners, I should say, that did not have, but they all confirmed that they were going to have nominations. I think, Tricia. I mean, is that? I don't know if you
They all mentioned that they were looking into
right.
appointments.
Sounded like we'd almost have something today to look, or I guess we don't see that, but that's
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a jump. Did you get any? Do you hear anything from them directly when they have appointments?
So generally, new appointments are listed on the city commission agenda, and tomorrow is the city commission meeting, and there
Okay.
aren't any proposed on
Okay.
tomorrow's agenda.
So
But-
Recording in progress.
The takeaway was positive. It seemed like everyone was on it. I made a very clear point that it was frustrating for the exact reason that the first agenda item didn't go today, that didn't go last week. Kind of, I don't want to say it spins our wheels on the board, but it makes our job very difficult to do if we can't hear the cases or the applications that are brought forth. And they seem to be very understanding of that. But again, I thought we'd have maybe one name in the hat.
The
at this
city
point.
doesn't work that quickly.
No, I guess not. But maybe, Tricia, if we don't have something by the next meeting for the next city commission, maybe Arthur will go up there and
I'd be
make a better
happy
case
to.
than I made. So,
Yeah, there
I
is
don't know.
another meeting on the 17th of October as well. And so we'll see.
Okay.
We'll keep our eyes out.
Yeah.
I know I was contacted by the city commissioner that appointed me asking about the time commitment because he was speaking with some potential volunteers. So I didn't realize since I missed last meeting that you were going to the commission, but it seems like he's at least motivated.
Well, good, okay. That's all we have on this. Then let's talk about for the good of the city of Fort Lauderdale.
So we have on the agenda a presentation from the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and Sarah Ayers-Rigsby is here to provide you guys with an overview of why archaeology is so important. So you can go to the podium and we'll bring up your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks everyone so much for being here this evening, this afternoon, and listening to me. My name is Sarah Ayers-Rigsby. I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network. We are a statewide educational organization. Tricia did let me know to be brief, to be in keeping with this brief meeting, so I promise I won't speak very long, and then I'll be available to answer questions for the board members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what archaeology is, what steps an archaeologist might take when they approach an archaeological site, and where that information goes, right? So I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network. Ooh, I think my slides are getting like cut off. Yeah, they're too big. Is there a way to adjust that? Anyone? Thank you. While he's fixing that, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization. So the Florida Public Archaeology Network, we are a statewide educational organization dedicated to promoting and facilitating stewardship of Florida's archaeological heritage. And we are actually established by state statute. I'm the director for the Southeast and Southwest regions. So I cover everything south of Lake Okeechobee. And we do everything from coming to meetings like this to talk to the community, to archaeology merit badges for the Boy Scouts, to talks for schools, and everything in between. So we're all about getting people into Florida's different archaeology. So obviously the city of Fort Lauderdale has a number of archaeological sites, many of which you all have evaluated and been informed about over your years here working for the city. But what exactly is archaeology, right? So archaeology is the study of the past through the things people leave behind. So archaeology is the study of what we call material culture, right? So when we think about material culture, that is anything that's been made or modified or used by humans. And this is important to archaeologists and to communities because we are trying to tell the story of the past through the things that people have left behind, right? So imagine if I was trying to tell your entire life story and I had maybe your trash you had left behind. I had, if I was very lucky, I might have the foundations of your house, right, to try and tell your life story. I might have a cemetery to try and interpret your life and religion from that. So that is what we are trying to do as archaeologists, right? And when it comes to historic preservation, archaeology is part of historic preservation because it is how we are telling that story of the past. Awesome. Thank you so much for fixing that for me. I appreciate it. So I explained what I do here at FPAN and where we are located. Our region is hosted by Florida Atlantic University, so each region in the state has a different partner organization. We've worked with Tricia and the city to do different events to try and engage the public in learning more about the city's archaeology. We already covered archaeology, the study of the past through the things people leave behind, right? So if anyone in this room thinks that I study dinosaurs, that's not true, right? We're looking at the evidence for human use and occupation. I'd also like to note a common misconception about archaeology is that archaeology is only the distant past. Archaeology can be historical, right? So anything that is, as you all know, anything that is over 50 years or older can be considered historical, and there may be an associated archaeological deposit with that, right, that could potentially be considered significant. When we think about archaeology in Fort Lauderdale, the New River has existed for millennia, right? So this has been a very attractive area for people to live throughout this time. So as the archaeological sensitivity maps for the city note, they really show people living on the waterways. That's why we're so concerned about areas that are near rivers. The two sites you see at the bottom are photos from the Archaeological and Historical Conservancy. One is the Fort Lauderdale beach site, and the other one is, of course, Rivermont. So when we think about the stages of an archaeological survey, I'll go briefly through those now because you all are often reviewing these archaeological reports, trying to learn and interpret what the archaeological consultant is saying, and you might be wondering, you know, hey, like I thought we already did an archaeological survey of this property. Why do people need to go back to it? What's going on there? So here in Florida, the stages of an archaeological survey range from the very basic, so a typically a desk review. So this is going to be someone that is looking over an area or a proposed project to try and figure out, has there been any archaeological work in that area before? Is it on or adjacent to a known site? And then they're going to do things like look at historical documentation of the area. We have a pedestrian survey, so at no point during a desk review typically is someone actually going to go out and visit the site. That typically happens during the next phase, which would be a pedestrian survey, right? So then people are going out, looking to see if there's artifacts on the ground or if there's anything that could indicate a historic site. So if you go out to a site like Rivermont, you see very clearly the change in elevation, which typically here in Florida indicates the potential for a buried site. And so on through the phase 1, which is shovel testing, phase 2, and phase 3. So the desk review, here's a type of historic photo that an archaeologist might look at. So prior to working for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, I was an archaeologist in the private sector. And I worked a lot in, before they would build cell towers, and I was the person that would go in and say, okay, is this cell tower going to disturb an archaeological site? So for this, when you're doing a desk review, it's really important up front as an archaeologist to say, okay, I'm doing a desk review. This proposed project is adjacent to a known documented site. But in the past, no archaeologists have actually completed an excavation in this new area, right? Because then the likelihood that you're going to have a complex project is very high. So as a consulting archaeologist, right, your responsibility is to your client, and you want to design a scope of work that's going to be appropriate for them to move through the work. You don't want to say to your client, oh, this site is going to be totally clear, when you might need to go through a phase 2 or even 3 to make this project happen. When an archaeologist is doing that initial desk review, they're going to work with the state of Florida. So all archaeological projects and archaeological reports here in the state of Florida are kept on file with the Florida State, the master site file, right? So that's your first step. Moving through to the pedestrian survey, that's when you're actually going to visit the site, see what kind of changes, are there artifacts on the surface? So for example, anything along the New River, if you have an area that's undeveloped, or maybe if a seawall is faltering, are you seeing things like eroding artifacts, eroding midden, and the like? And a midden is an intact archaeological deposit. People typically think of it as like an ancient trash pile, right? So that's something we could see, but that's going to be a lot of evidence of what people were doing out at that site. Then moving into the phase 1, so here we are again back out at Rivermont. And this is, so typically this would be shovel testing, so you're actually digging these small shovel tests in the ground at regular intervals. And if you look on this slide on the top left, I have a map of what the shovel test interval would look like, overlaid with different features that you might find, right? So some shovel tests might not have any kind of archaeological material. Others might have artifacts. And then every time you hit any kind of positive artifact or positive feature, you're going to change your testing strategy to try and figure out exactly what could be there. Because your entire goal is to try and figure out if this site is going to be eligible for listing, for historical listing or designation, right? Whether that is National Register, whether it is, or whether it is eligible for local designation. So moving into the phase 2, which is not going to be necessary for every site, you are trying to establish the both the temporality of the site, right? How long ago was it made? How long were people living there? What is important about this site? And you're also trying to answer that question of significance, right? Because the phase 2 is really critical to determine if a project is moving forward. Are you going to need to move forward with total mitigation of the area, right? So that's something, an archaeological site that is so important that it has an unparalleled ability to contribute to our understanding of the historical record here in the city. And then moving through into the phase 3, it would require total excavation of that site. So this is a photo from the site down at 444 Brickell in Miami. This site has been determined, right, by the city of Miami, the city of Miami and the state, that it has this, that it is incredibly significant, right? So as a result, even though construction is moving forward on this site, archaeologists have to come in and remove almost everything and document it. So that's why they're moving through with the phase 3. Other options, if for some reason you have, if you do not want to move forward with the phase 3, which can be very expensive, include moving the site, right? So that's an option that we see, especially something like cell towers, or if people are, or for smaller kind of private development, we see people maybe choosing not to move forward or moving something to try and avoid the archaeological site altogether. And that's also our preference as archaeologists, right? If something has been in place for 5,000 years and we don't absolutely have to disturb it, we don't want to disturb it, right? So phase 3 is only when this building or this infrastructure absolutely has to be in this place. So when we talk about archaeology, in addition to the actual excavation, other archaeological methodologies include remote sensing, so things like ground penetrating radar, drone or LiDAR surveys, and this is on the far left in that picture, that's my colleague doing an electromagnetic resistivity study. So the things she's dragging behind her that look like pool buoys, those are actually sensors, and she's looking to see if there's any kind of buried component that could indicate a site in that agricultural field. And then on the right, that is a ground penetrating radar on a burial mound up in North Florida. So one of the things that I like to encourage people to remember, especially people like yourselves, when you're looking at these projects, is that when we are using a remote sensing technique, it's important to note that none of these are perfect, right? So you often see archaeologists using remote sensing then in conjunction with some kind of ground truthing, some kind of excavation. And we also see archaeologists, maybe they know that there's, from doing remote sensing, that there's some kind of aberration at the site, but they don't know exactly what that aberration could mean, right? So let's say you have potential for a historic cemetery. Almost every single cemetery that I've ever worked on in my entire life has burials that are outside the modern boundary of the cemetery. So when you are doing ground penetrating radar to try and identify where those burials could be, you don't have a clear map saying, you know, this is a burial here. Instead, you have a complex set of data that you interpret and analyze based on your previous experience, based on what a cemetery might look like in that type of particular soil, right? So that's why as archaeologists, again, we typically have to do some ground truthing in addition to the remote sensing. And also, even though the sensing is remote, it's not that remote, right? So if you are looking for a burial with a ground penetrating radar, you have to use ground penetrating radar in that specific area, right? You can't use it on like a neighboring parcel and be like, no, this parcel is clear. You have to actually use the technology where you want to move forward with that construction. Archaeology is also more than just field work. For every day in the field, we typically spend 3 to 4 days in the lab analyzing, documenting, and processing our results. These typically for the city and for anyone who is working in any kind of construction-related archaeology, all of those reports are then sent up to Tallahassee. The state keeps them on file so that then when people are trying to work in that area again, if they have someone who's done archaeology work before in that specific area or nearby, they kind of know what to expect, right? So that helps with that additional research and helps contribute to our understanding of this area. Here's a map. This is the Tequesta. So the people that were here when the Spanish came were referred to as the Tequesta. That's what the Spanish called them. We don't actually know what they called themselves. So I guess it would be like, instead of being called Fort Lauderdaleans, we were called like Trentalians or Trent. So everyone was named after their leader. So we have, when we look at this map, this document illustrates the Tequesta sites that have been identified here in South Florida in Broward and Dade counties. So we see that this area was heavily settled and heavily used. And I know sometimes when I'm in these meetings and I'm listening to people come and, they have an archaeological site maybe on their property and people are surprised. But this is a wonderful place to live, right? It's been a wonderful place to live for thousands of years. So we're existing with this physical record of what people in the past have done, right? I just like people to remember that archaeology is everywhere. Archaeology is all around us. It's not just in Greece and Rome and Israel. It's everywhere. We want to note that existing landscape features could indicate that there's some kind of archaeological component. So again, here in Fort Lauderdale, any kind of elevation change could have archaeological or human component. And that testing and monitoring are necessary to document these sites. And finally, remember, it's up to all of us to protect archaeological sites. Archaeologists don't do this alone. Archaeology is, again, it's a study of the past through the things people leave behind, but it's relevant to the present, and we work with different descendant communities to help try and interpret what we're finding from the past, right? So we work with tribal communities, other communities to try and learn more about the past. And when we think about these archaeological sites, they are a non-renewable resource, right? So there is never going to be another Tequesta Earth Midden created, right? There's never going to be another Seminole War era fort created. Once these sites are gone, they're gone. So thank you all so much, and thanks for all you do to protect and preserve these sites.
Thank you for coming today. I think some of the board members may have some questions for you.
Great, thank you.
I know you do. Richard.
I'm just trying to understand the state statutes and the federal statutes, because from what I've read and seen, federal and state do not require private property owners to do surveys. It's more for public or for commercial, I suppose, that it's required to do them. And so where are we with trying to force private properties to pay for funding to the states or to counties, cities, to do these things? Because that's what it comes down to. Private properties are funding the research for these things by paying for all of it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So you're right. Most of the archaeology in this country is typically happening through Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So that federal law states that before there can be any kind of federal undertaking, right, whether the undertaking is regulated or funded by the federal government, so things like highways, cell towers, like I mentioned before, gas pipelines, you have to consider what the impact is going to be on historic resources. So in that case, whoever is the person who is actually building that infrastructure is going to be responsible for paying the consulting archaeologist, right? So, for example, when I worked on a gas pipeline, the reason they had archaeologists working there is to make sure that this gas pipeline was going to impact as few archaeological sites as possible. And that was paid for by the construction company that was actually building the pipeline, right? And similar with cell towers, you're being, the archaeologist who's consulting that is being paid for by the private sector, right? So in terms of private landowners, it really depends on the regulation of the city or the county. So Tricia or the legal team, I'm sure, could kind of talk in a little bit more detail specifically about the city. But again, with requirements for federal projects, it's typically the developer who is paying for that cost.
But the state of Florida is only for public properties as well. So you're implying that is a county or city that's requiring this of private property owners.
So the state of Florida, they're looking at things like public lands, right? So state parks, federal public lands are of course covered again by the federal government. But the state also has things like submerged bottomlands, and then like 3 nautical miles out on the East Coast, and then I think 8 nautical miles out on the Gulf Coast are considered state property. So we have an archaeological research team. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if our assistant city attorney wanted to also weigh in on this.
Oh, thank you. Yes, because I'm 100% not a lawyer.
Shari, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Barely.
I think I already talked about this, but I'll say it again. So in our Constitution for the state of Florida, Article 7, I believe, Section 10, it prohibits us from aiding any person with our tax money that we get. And so there is no exception that I have found that will enable the city to pay for a part of an expense as a private property owner. So anyone that comes in here requesting a certificate of appropriateness, they're requesting some sort of improvement somehow on their property. And so there is no statute that I've found or case law that has an exception to this prohibition in the Constitution for payment of any archaeological survey or study. Now, what I did find, though, for business owners, there is a capital investment tax credit that under a Florida statute 220191 that business owners, if they're required to do that for their property, then they could possibly qualify for the tax credit, but there's some other criteria as well. But there is no statute or case law that I've found yet that will allow the city an exception under the Florida Constitution. A private property's expenses are their own expenses. And so that's all I have right now.
Shari, thank you. Go ahead.
No, I was just trying to figure out as I'm going through this is that from my understanding from the state, that the state does not require private property owners to do archaeological studies on their properties. It's the county and the city that's doing it. So if that's the case,
the federal government.
No, those are on government property, not on private properties. So
or
that's
if it's regulated by the federal government. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So
I'm trying to discern, where is that coming from that you're requiring private properties to pay for funding of these surveys when it's not required by the federal or the state government? Where is the law that say the private property owners have to do surveys on their properties or do these things to do construction on private property?
Richard?
So
that
Tricia
question should be directed to Tricia or Shari.
Yeah, so Tricia had mentioned about some code provisions. I can read to you what is in our comprehensive plan. So that's policy HP 1.2.3A, and it says that the city has to require all development proposals that involve ground disturbing activities on archaeological sites or within archaeologically significant zones, as identified on the city official map, historic resources map as amended, to provide an appropriate level cultural resource study to the city that indicates the location, extent, status, and proposed impacts to archaeological or related above ground historic resources. So if you bring forth a development to the city, then it's required by our comp plan that you perform a study when the criteria has been met under the comp plan. Now I can defer to Tricia for the code sections if she wants to read them.
I can read them. I need a minute to actually look them up.
I mean, can we just sum it up instead of reading them? I mean, because I think really that's the answer to your question.
Right. And so then, as you had stated before, that the city can't help pay for those, but can there be an application or a grant that pays for this from the state? Because the state is the person that's benefiting from this information, not private property owners.
So I don't really see it about a benefit versus anything else. It's just a matter of if a private property owner voluntarily wants to submit an application to do any of those improvements or new construction, et cetera, that's a part of the requirement. It's not about benefiting. It's just a part of the requirement that is in our comp plan, and Tricia can read the other parts. We don't have requirements based on who may benefit. It's just that's required. So I don't see it that way. Now, that's in our comp plan. That would have to require a comprehensive plan amendment to remove that. But that is not something that is best removed just because, as I stated before, if you remove bones or any of those things from any of these archaeological sites, you're subject to a charge of a felony. And so our intention is to make sure that we do everything we can to comply with the law and not allow folks to remove any of these artifacts.
Thank you, Sherry.
Sherry, we'll let you stop talking now. But thank you for your insight. That's very helpful. And I think you have answers to your questions, Richard? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you very much for helping us today.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time.
And I guess the only other thing that we have on the agenda, unless someone else has something to add, is the new meeting dates schedule?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
So in your packets, you should have received the proposed meeting dates for 2024. And so that's for the board's consideration and to vote on that. So we would need a motion and a second and a roll call.
You want us to vote on it right now? Okay.
Yes, we have to make it official.
All right. Does anyone have any concerns about any of these dates that you can tell right now? So the only ones that are really changed would be September. No, we already did that.
January and September.
January and September, yes. Right, yes. All right, if no one has any proposed changes, would someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve the suggested dates as presented.
Great. And is there a second? Seconded by Alan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Great. And with that, we'll entertain a motion. Yes. About what? The what?
Can we have him speak on the mic because I can't hear.
He is. He's coming up to the mic.
Okay.
And just for the record, please introduce yourself.
David Kiner, and tonight I'm speaking in reference to my position as Vice President of the Civic Association of Sailboat Bend. We have some concern among the members about not knowing whether or not their particular property actually falls within a significant zone and
significant archaeological
zone, what we've been talking about here. And of course, they're wondering why they aren't notified when they suddenly are surprised that they have to start doing a dig. And a lot of people who've been recently forced to do this dig and pay for it, are very frightened about what's going to happen and how it might affect their going forward with the plans that they have. The suggestion came up that the city has an obligation to inform people that they are living in a sensitive area. Some have even said, well, why would I have ever bought this property if you're hiding from me that it is a sensitive area? They all know that Sailboat Bend is a historic district. That's not a problem. Recently, they have added notations under the Broward property appraisers list that they may be notified, they're notified that they are in a potential area where there is special regulations. So what they're asking about is, why doesn't this board require that that information be made public in the same method that the previous information that I talked to you about through the Broward property appraiser? And if not, why is it being kept secret from them? Because people are going to dig in their property. Why? They're going to plant a tree. They're going to do a garden. They're going to do things on their own. And the feeling is it's unrealistic to tell us that as soon as we do something ground disturbing, we're breaking the law. So I don't know if there's some kind of exception for that written into the law. And frankly, people don't know, well, how are they going to punish me? What's the punishment? I didn't hear Sherry say anything about what the punishment is if you get caught digging in your yard. And I think it's a little bit like the bicycle thing. As Dean Tantrillis explained to me, you're not supposed to ride your bicycle on the street, or excuse me, on the sidewalk, but we don't have any punishments for it. So it's not in the law. So people do what they want to do. Well, I don't know what to tell people, and I would like the board to clarify that for me, or else ask the city to clarify it for me.
One thing I could add, but I'm going to let Tricia jump in on this one, is I know if an archaeological study, I believe, is warranted and you don't do it, you may not get your building permit.
That makes sense. That makes sense. But I'm asking what, a little bit different question.
I would rather direct this to the city.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, part of what I'm hearing here is that there is no notification on any form to property owners before they purchase properties that this would be required on the property. So it's a surprise to anybody that they're in an archaeological significant zone. So therefore, there has to be some kind of method for real estate agents or somebody to provide this information to potential landowners.
Well, we did at one point have the same issue, I think when you were on the board, about how people would know that they're actually in a historic district. And we did speak to the official who actually, they said they put it on the record now.
Yeah.
It is. So,
Yeah, it's on Broward property appraiser.
So I don't know how this information might do the same thing and get it on the record.
Yeah, I mean, right now we do have the information available on our website through a map, but it is not on BCPA. We have not been asked to do that for archaeologically significant zones and for properties within them. As far as requirements, specifically within the Sailboat Bend Historic District for archaeological surveys, it's only when a property owner applies for a development permit, which is a certificate of appropriateness, and generally it's only required when there's a significant amount of ground disturbing work. So it would be when someone's doing demolition or new construction of a major kind. So complete new construction, a new addition. We recently had one that is elevating their property and would be doing this significant amount of ground disturbing work. But it's not just when you're planting a garden or doing yard work or anything of that nature. It's really coming into play when it's an actual development permit where there'd be a significant amount of ground disturbing work.
But Trish, why would that not be public information that that people would just be always given that information, because most people who buy a house plan to do something with it.
Yeah,
So what would
not that
harm
it's-
people if they knew about it?
It hasn't really been something that has been asked for in the past, so it's something that we would have to look into as far as how we could actually do something if that is desired by the board and the city commission.
Okay, well, then I guess my final statement would be that our civic association is very interested, if you feel like following up on it, very interested to see how people can be told up front. Nobody likes to think something is being hidden from them. That's all.
Tricia, just one question on it. I'm sorry, Arthur, to jump you, but has there ever been an application before you for a certificate of appropriateness that has not been granted, or that has, I guess it's a tough question to ask, is it, if it's not proceeded, but to David's point, has anything ever been stopped because of the archaeological requirement? Has anyone not proceeded on a project based on that alone?
No, typically it's a mitigation effort. So
Right.
there's some sort of mitigation that occurs in order to help the project proceed.
Right. And typically it's a phase, we'll call it a phase one, but it's a very preliminary part of the horizontal development, so to speak, where they go and they do an initial inspection, and if anything's found, then at that point they'll pause. But I don't remember a single instance even going to phase two. Has anything come to phase two in your knowledge in Sailboat Bend?
Not that I can recall recently.
That's the only reason
Not in Sailboat Bend.
I asked the questions only because I totally agree with the notice aspect, but maybe it hasn't come up because it really hasn't been of issue for a single permit. That's,
Like, for example, Rivermont, if it were to have been developed rather than turned into a park, it was recommended for a phase two.
Sure.
I don't understand why this isn't a bigger deal, because the river and all the archaeological significant zones, because Fort Lauderdale's built in so much water, all of these properties you've implied are getting approval to do these construction projects with archaeological surveys done. So if that's the case, why isn't a bigger deal for all of these properties to get posted on the Broward County property appraisers as requiring this stuff?
Let's make a suggestion, and Tricia can follow up on it with the Broward County, with the property appraiser, to see what we need to do to get this information on the website, just like we did with the historic notification.
Yeah, previously we didn't have information on the BCPA
Right.
about historic properties, and the Historic Preservation Board made that request to put that information there, and so then that's how it ultimately
Can this
happened.
constitute the board making a request?
You would need to send a communication to the city commission.
Oh, we would.
Yeah, I believe that is how we did it previously,
Okay.
because any task that would occupy staff's time would need to be directed by the city commission.
Okay. Richard, did you want to?
I just don't want to make. I understand the points on why the communication would be made, but I just don't. I don't perceive in a transactional sense people not purchasing property, although the notice is great. I don't think it harms anything, but I just don't see anyone. My question would be if someone presented to me, well, there's an archaeological significance to this. Okay, what does that mean? It means there's a possibility that their ground disturbing work would trigger a certificate of appropriateness, which is an additional step in the building process anyway. Okay. Has anyone ever been stopped from building because of that? No. Okay. Let's move on.
Do we know that? Do we know that?
I just asked. I mean, yeah, we're having an open discussion. By all means, come up.
Michaela Conka, Broward Trust for Historic Preservation. To your point, the castle property, I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah.
Okay, there was an obvious mound there. And unfortunately, after the fact, I discovered that land was on an part of the archaeologically sensitive zone map. To my knowledge, after the settled, after the dust settled with the decision for the castle, the landowner developer has been able to move forward with his project. Much
true?
to my chagrin.
Really?
Yes.
And was there an
Yes.
archaeological survey done in that?
That's my question as well as my statement. Because Sarah actually went out and did a visual site, and agreed that the land was unusually, wasn't typical to South Florida, let's put it that way. Whether it was a man-made mound, that the earth had been moved around by the previous owners, we'll never know, I guess. But the most disturbing fact for me, from a historic preservation perspective, was the fact that that land was over 100 years old and had never been touched from a development standpoint. So it was one of the few pieces of land that still followed along that map, that archaeologically zoned.
Michaela, that was the castle in Tarpon River?
Yes.
That we did not approve a certificate of appropriateness for. We did not approve it, correct?
It went to
denied.
commission.
Oh, it went to commission.
It went to commission.
And that's what happened. Okay.
And the
I didn't know the
the castle did receive historic designation.
Okay.
The structure alone, the land was separate.
Okay.
So he was free and clear to do what he wanted in terms of the development of that land.
So can we just go back to the two questions at hand, because we're really
Sure.
going all over the place?
Yeah.
Michaela had one question about the castle, and then there's a larger question where I think we need to vote on making a communication to the city commission.
So the castle, ultimately just the building itself was designated and not the surrounding land. So there's not a purview over that for just anything for historic preservation. But for what is being proposed, I don't believe they've started construction at the site.
They're doing a lot of
they're
work
doing
over
something.
there, Trish. They've done seawall, pull out the existing seawall. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it.
Site work.
Yeah.
Well, what they proposed did not require a development permit, where it required approval through any body like the Historic Preservation Board or the Development Review Committee or Planning and Zoning Board. So we don't have the authority per the language in the ULDR to have them do any archaeological study there.
So, but getting back to their concerns, my point of all of this is that despite the fact that I was disturbed by it, the developer was not affected by it in any way and was able to move forward without the disruption
Well, because they weren't doing any development per se on the property, it sounds like. They were just doing
Right
the
now.
seawall around.
Right
well,
now.
But that's always a different permit. The
Right.
public improvements.
But his goal is to build.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm a little confused.
So-
I'm hearing mixed things from the city about what's required and why it's required. Because previously I've heard that any property that's on an archaeologically significant zone has to get approval to do any kind of development or digging on it. And tonight I just heard you say that there was no board that was requiring the castle to do an archaeological dig. So
No. So it's
Because they
when
weren't
there's a development permit application required for a proposal, and a development permit is something that goes through a board or committee for approval. So it'd be in the code it says any use approval, plat approval, site plan approval, development review committee order, zoning permit or rezoning, special exception, variance, certificate of appropriateness, historic designation, or other official action having the effect of permitting the development as defined in the ULDR. And that is what authorizes us as part of the ULDR to review the archaeological sites.
But that does not include site work. I didn't hear that. Because
So-
site work and development work could be construed as two different things.
Ideally, the city would have a certificate to dig ordinance, and that would provide an ordinance that would oversee any major ground disturbing work within any archaeologically significant zone in any location. We don't have that. So what we have is in the ULDR telling us when there is a development permit application, we can review for archaeologically significance. And then we also have in the comprehensive plan that talks about doing the study. We also have other areas of the code within the historic preservation section that talks about archaeological review. We also have the certified local government agreement. So there's several different layers, but ultimately a clearer format would be a separate ordinance that talked about it. So there are certain instances where, like what Michaela is talking about, there's two different parcels and only the castle is designated, which is a small portion of the property. They're proposing townhouses, from what I recall, on those locations, or not townhouses, they're actually a duplex. That doesn't require them to go to the DRC for a duplex because they're not in the historic area. So
even though they're in the zone.
Yeah.
This is,
Right.
That's the
So-
problem I had with this all along. Yeah.
Right, and so am I,
So-
because you're really signaling out the Sailboat Bend area because of the fact that we're a historic district.
No,
and you're not doing
there's
other
other
properties.
properties that do have requirements for archaeological review, and that is enforced through the Development Review Committee. But if a property does not come before the Development Review Committee for any request, then it's not imposed.
It's a catch-22.
So if it doesn't go to DRC, no one's going to flag it at the at the normal building zoning, any other level, unless it's coming through HPB, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's my larger point with what David was mentioning. Why would we want to add on to Sailboat Bend's additional layer of, I guess it's there anyway, but I don't see the point in adding it as a notice because it's there. I guess it's a buyer beware thing you guys are arguing
But
for.
I think we should add it as a notice. It can't hurt because we found with the historic designation,
I don't think
if we
it's
didn't
okay.
add it, I mean, people would say, well, I didn't know where to find it.
Well, they're going to, yeah. I mean,
And that's the point. It's not readily available to the layperson. So no real estate
So-
agent's going to necessarily
But at least
know
if-
that.
But at least if it's noted and flagged, even if people don't know what it means, they'll ask somebody.
I don't think it's going to help Sailboat Bend to have that added, to be honest.
I think it would help the city to have it added.
The city has it added.
And I don't
It's
think
there.
But not
but I'm
on the
pointing out,
property
I don't think it's just a Sailboat Bend issue. As I'm
No,
pointing
it's
out,
not.
it's every property that is in an archaeologically significant zone
Right.
should have it notified on the Broward County property appraiser.
Okay,
But that's
so-
never going to happen in like sort of a thematic way, like Arthur's described other things. If we just do Sailboat Bend, how is it going to happen? You're asking the county to go tag every single parcel that applies to?
Well, if they can do the same
If
thing.
it's relevant
with-
to
with-
having them required to do an
They can do
archaeological
the-
dig.
And they can do the same thing with historic properties, why can't they do the same?
They don't
with
do the
this?
same thing with historic properties. They do it for Sailboat Bend because we asked them.
I understand. Well,
They're
I
not
think-
going to
I
Victoria
think we
Park
should-
and tagging
I
a
think
separate
we should
parcel.
ask for the whole city. If there's an issue, they'll tell us.
Because reality
All
is that
historically designated properties are flagged in BCPA.
In BCPA,
Mm-hmm.
right? How would that apply in an archaeological context? We do the same thing. They go.
It's something I would have to look into.
Yeah.
As far as the feasibility.
I'm not in favor of it.
Has the board seen the map?
I've seen the map.
it's in our binders.
It's extensive. Yeah, it is.
So the question before the board now is, do people feel as if we should have a communication to the city commission and do what we did with the historic designation and ask that this issue of archaeological studies be placed on the property website, appraiser website? I'm not making a motion, but that's the issue.
And I'm happy to make that motion that
Would anybody like to make a motion?
He's making it.
that we request the city commissioners.
I'm sorry, we're in the middle of making a motion. We can't do it now, I'm sorry. Richard?
That the board makes a request to the city commissioners that we add any property that is an archaeological significant zone to the Broward County property appraisers information.
In the city of Fort Lauderdale?
Yes.
Okay.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Richard?
I'm not in favor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alan?
No.
No? 3-2, the motion carries. Please.
Is that sufficient, by the way, Tricia, just from a quasi-judicial quorum? 3-2, it carry, even though we don't have 4? Yeah, we're good? It's majority?
I'll let Shari confirm.
Okay,
but-
just making sure. I know we need 4 for
Yes,
other things.
it's by the majority of the board
Okay.
members present.
Okay.
Right now you have
Thank
4.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maggie Hunt, Sailboat Bend. Just a quick comment on that.
Introduce yourself first.
I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a quick comment on that. What Richard was saying, I think for people buying property in the future, it wouldn't be good for the neighborhood. I see what you're saying, but it's also not fair to have a $20,000 bill all of a sudden when you don't know about it. You know, okay. So the other thing, we were talking about grants, and I think the attorney said something about the city's not able to use tax money, and that was that a state statute or ordinance or law or whatever. And the reason I'm asking is because here on the Town of Jupiter website, it says in 2019, the town established a grant program to assist owners of historically designated properties with matching grant funds up to $100,000 for certain exterior and interior preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation improvements. The process for making these types of improvements to a historic structure can be cumbersome from the owner, both in process and monetarily. So the town is hoping to be able to encourage these improvements through a partnership that would relieve the financial burden and streamline the approval process. And they have an application there. So if this is a city ordinance that doesn't allow us to use tax money, I think we should change it so we can do what the city of Jupiter is doing. If it's a state thing, then my question is, why can the city of Jupiter do it and we can't?
My first question would be, what do they define as improvements to the property? Because that can be defined differently.
Right, but I think the attorney's telling us that we can't, the city can't put any tax money.
Statute.
Right, so this is the city of Jupiter in Fort Lauderdale that's doing this.
Shari, would you like to weigh in?
Okay. So the city of Jupiter, my understanding, is in Palm Beach County. Now I know you're reading from something, but I'd have to go and see what their legal authority is to do that. And I didn't mention a statute for purposes of a prohibition on paying for private property's expenses. I mentioned the Florida Constitution, and that is the pledging credit section, Article 7, Section 10, about not helping individuals. But there are exceptions to that written in the statute. I just have not seen any exceptions for as historic property. Now, Jupiter, I'd have to read everything and reach out to them and see what legal authority they use. But just because another city does something does not mean it's legally correct. I would have to make sure I have a basis for doing so. So I'm not sure where you're reading from, but I'd be glad to reach out.
Shari, I just have one question.
It's the city of Jupiter website, the town of Jupiter. And I would appreciate it if you would look into it, because it's rare. This is a big deal.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up with one question to Shari. Shari, you mentioned that you could not do this with properties that were historic. What about non-historic properties that are in the archaeological zone?
Yeah, like I said, I have to research and see if there's any basis in any statute to allow that. So far, I have not found anything that permits that. Now, like I said, just because another city does something does not mean it's legally correct.
Understood.
But I'll be glad to look into what Jupiter is doing and see what their legal authority is, if that is something that they have.
So can we continue this discussion at the next meeting?
All right, well, I do note that the city of Fort Lauderdale used to have what was called a Neighborhood Community Investment Program, an NCIP, which is what I thought some of the funds went into helping private property owners with the structures that are on their properties, whether it's the front garden or painting the house or different things. So did that get voted to eradicate it because it violated state laws, or what happened to that program?
Richard, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think, why don't we let Shari do her homework so she can come back with certainty. So do we want to continue this discussion? Hello, board? Yes? I know two of you don't.
I'm all set on it.
Well, there are three of us who voted, so
Yeah.
I'd like to at least continue the discussion, see what Shari can find out, and then see where we are.
So it's a discussion on funding.
Well, it was the question that Richard just asked. Is there any possibility that the city can fund something like this, and is it legal? Considering everything else
we
that's
have
happening.
had multiple conversations about
I know we have.
incentives and how they're funded. I'm sure, sounds like Shari will look into the specific instance to report back, but, we can put that on the agenda as such.
I just wanted to ask the two no votes. Richard, what was your reason not wanting to have this investigated so we can put it on the property appraiser page?
Specifically regarding archaeology,
Yeah.
I think Silver Bend had enough of a circumstance regarding the fact that it's the only historically designated part of the city where we've seen, if you look at some of the ways that deferred maintenance has occurred and people have not made the updates that you would see in other parts of the city for their own reasons. I think some of that has had to do with the fact that there's been some difficulty in navigating through the city, and it can be done. We're all sitting here, right? I've done it personally a handful of times, and I've been fine with it. But I don't want to continue to add to that plate for people. Okay. And I think mostly, I don't know this from a perspective of a loan, but when someone gets that application to lend on a property and they're going to get a archaeologically significant flag on that, I would think that's also going to have an implication on whether these transactions can occur. So I think it's not just what meets the eye and having that constructive notice. I think there's a lot more than we're biting off here than we even realize today.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah,
and
it's a real consideration.
I'd like Shari, as she has said she would, to investigate this a little further. And then let's come back and just see where
and
we
the main
are.
reason, Arthur, is a question I asked. It's never gotten to a point where anything is not proceeded with new construction. So therefore, I think it's sort of putting something that will scare people.
That would be a question to ask the head of the building department.
Well, it's a question I just asked Tricia. Tricia, since you've been here,
Tricia's not the building department.
Well,
though.
but Tricia is the person that sees those through Silvo Bend. Is that correct? Right? All those applications
all
come
of
to you.
the archaeological
You have the source
surveys
right here,
and
right?
reports come to my desk.
Right. So it's never stopped anyone. So why are we adding it? Why are we adding more things?
Well,
But it's already added. It's already added for people. It's just about being transparent about what are the
Exactly.
additional costs for them.
Fair enough.
And that was kind of the point, because as a real estate agent, you will have customers, clients come back to you and make a statement. It's like,
But that's
I
not their
was never
job.
informed, and information is not readily available to
But
the
Richard,
average
that's
real
not
estate agent.
that's
So
not
if
their
it's
job.
on-
The real estate agent's job is not to advise upon archaeological
I know, but
situations.
you're making, my point is, you're making information available to people when they buy the property. Otherwise, they come back to you and say, you did not inform me. Why isn't
But they're
this
not
money
going to
on-"
buy the property. That's my point. It's going to scare people off. That's what I'm trying
Well,
to say.
I think we have a discussion, either
Yeah.
to be transparent or not.
Yeah.
That's
I mean-
really the point of it. And I understand your point about protecting the neighborhood, but let's continue this next time.
But it's not
Well,
just the neighborhood.
and it's
the
it's the entire city.
zones, because
No, it's the entire city. that
So
we should
there
be-
are two different issues. One issue has been voted on as a communication to the City Commission regarding placement of the archaeologically significant zones on BCPA. So that's separate. And then the other issue that was discussed was regarding the grant program of the city or town of Jupiter and the feasibility,
Right.
why they can do it. And
If we can also.
or even an NCIP, which is a program that they had at one point. So it's the staff here investigating whether there are options for grants being available
Right.
to applicants.
okay.
Okay, great. Is there a motion to?
Well, I actually had other things I wanted to discuss, and it relates to some of this material that we're actually discussing tonight. And maybe it's just a simple question to Shari, but and as a certified local government, is the city obligated or responsible for implementing plans to prevent further deterioration of historic preservation properties? Does the city have any liability for neglecting issues which could harm persons or private property caused by water flowing from the publicly paved streets without proper drainage into historic properties, or elevate or repair seawalls on city-owned properties to prevent further intrusion of water onto historic properties? What responsibility does the city have, knowing that these are issues, to the community of Sailboat Bend or for the historic districts when you're not addressing the issues? Shari?
So I believe we already had the head of Public Works come in here and talk about all the stormwater issues.
Yes.
I'm just not sure why it keeps being brought up. We already discussed this. The head of Public Works came in here and answered all the questions pertaining to stormwater. Do you want him to come back again? Because it seems like we're just hearing the same thing, but he answered all those questions before.
Right, because part of the issue that you brought up before last week is that this board and you did not want to have charrettes. So the only way of having this discussion is through this board. So because there is like $10 million that's being given to Dorsey Bend and $10 million given to other districts to do stormwater drainage, and yet Sailboat Bend is not provided funds to improve the drainage and the stormwater issues in that district. When you're adding an additional layer of historic preservation and you're a certified local government and not doing preservation with the city streets and the city-owned lots and land, then how are you going to prevent the water going into these properties that you're requiring these property owners to preserve? Like you go into a grocery store and you have water, you know about it, and yet you don't do anything about it. Are you liable for not doing anything?
Okay, so I think perhaps if you want the public works guy to come back, then he could answer your question once more. I know that he's talked about the fact that we can't do all of the stormwater work at one time. Everything is done in a certain order. But if you want him to come back and say more stuff, maybe Tricia can have him back again, because I don't want to keep talking about the same thing every time we have representatives come and answer questions, and then now it's coming back up again. I don't know what else you want other than someone to come from Public Works and speak. They've done that. I can't keep repeating myself.
Shari, would it be helpful if we directed a specific question to Public Works?
All right, so even if I don't do a Public Works, because we've already had them, do we need to call the Dean Torntalis and the mayor or the city manager to come before the board to explain their decisions on not doing anything to protect these properties, because they are ultimately responsible for some of these decisions too?
I have a question here. Why can't the neighborhood association go right to their commissioners? I mean, we as a board are kind of limited because everything goes back to the commission. So
Right,
I'm
but
wondering
as a board-
why all of this isn't addressed directly to them.
But as a board, we're equally responsible for not addressing the preservation of the city. We're ignoring those same issues because we're not doing anything by making recommendations to have a charrette or to have people before making plans to prevent this. Look, before, and what, the city had, I had spoke to Patricia Zeller, his director of the Historic Fort Lauderdale. And my understanding from her in a conversation, there's not been a charrette since 1974, almost 50 years ago. And look,
That's
the
not
rising
true. We had
seawater.
a charrette on this board a number of years ago.
And you talked about the vision and the plans for Sailboat Bend and the historic districts?
We tried to.
That was not a charrette then. That was a HPB discussion.
Well, that was a discussion about trying to change.
If I may,
Yes.
any individual board member is free to reach out to the head of Public Works and they can answer your questions. Or if you want, we can ask them to come back again. But it's just that I feel like we keep going round and round in circles about this discussion about stormwater. There's a certain order that the city does things in. And, I'm not sure where Sailboat Bend is on that list, but I really feel like that should be directed towards Public Works. Now, if you want them to come back, Tricia can ask, but I just feel like when they're here is the time to ask all of these questions, because if you keep asking outside of them, it's just a waste of time, quite frankly.
So, Richard, you want to go right to Public Works and ask on behalf of your neighborhood association?
I'm not part of the membership, or not the.
Oh, well, I would rather than jump right into the board, I'd rather get some answers first, because we're not talking with any clarity here until we really go back to the Public Works.
All right, I'm just puzzled by we're a historic preservation board, and we, the board, nor the city, are taking responsibility for improving or mitigating the problems of the historic districts that we have. So we're just ignoring it when climate change and the environment is causing further damage to these properties, and no progress is made to mitigate those issues. So if we don't have a discussion, we don't do anything to address it, we're going to have more properties that are coming forward with these demolition by neglect, or demolition because they can't do anything with the properties because climate is causing problems.
You know, I just want to encourage you to speak to somebody at Public Works before we bring them here, because he did say, as Shari mentioned, that they have a schedule where they go around the city and do the work. Unfortunately, it doesn't address the work that may need to be done right now that you're talking about, but that's a question that they can answer. I'm just saying, go right to the source.
So the Sustainability Division does have a grant for a vulnerability study, and that's something that will include historic properties, and we'll look at Sailboat Bend. But that's something that's really necessary in order for us to even be able to potentially apply for grant funding for city-owned parcels to make improvements like a new seawall or something of that nature. So that's something that's kind of happening in the historic preservation realm that we're working on with that group. And I know you mentioned a charrette, Richard, and it would require multiple departments. It's a large effort from what you've described in the past, and it's not necessarily just historic preservation. But
of course, and that's the point, is because there's so many departments and so many issues that need to be discussed, and only one department dealing with it is not going to resolve the issues of the entire community. Because in 1988, look, they promised a lot of different things with the infrastructure, with the water, wastewater, disposal, storm drains, street lights, sidewalks were all going to be dealt with in a fashion that was consistent with city policy and educational programs. Proper maintenance of septic systems are planned. All of this stuff was promised in 1988, and none of it has been delivered, and that's, again, 35 years ago. So if the city is planning these things and doesn't execute them, of course the infrastructure is going to deteriorate, and you're going to have property owners that can't maintain their properties due to, like, all these problems are not being addressed.
Yeah. And I think, as we've discussed before, and it's a little out of our realm within the Historic Preservation Board to be able to handle these issues. And we did bring the Director of Public Works here, and they do have a plan to move forward. And like he said on the record, they can only do their best. So I think that's, what they're trying to do. But as Shari mentioned, you can reach out directly. Or if it's the desire of the board, we can request him to come back.
Anyone else have any comments?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Did you second? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.